Hi all, Wolf Lord Rho here. Today we are taking a look at an Imperium starship being raided by foul Xeno Dark Eldar, and the human reaction to the arrival of their saviours, the Black Dragons chapter. This isn't a particularly long or epic action-packed passage this time, but I really enjoyed this look at just how a normal human reacts to the arrival of Adeptus Astartes, and not just any chapter of Astartes, but the Black Dragons. Spoiler warning as usual, the events we are talking about today are from the short story Tribute of Flesh. I will put a link to the Black Library website in the description. As always, I really recommend you read the novel for yourself first. Not only do you get the most enjoyment out of it this way, but we also help to support the great Black Library and Games Workshop. Because without them, we don't have this great lore to enjoy and that we all love to talk about. But with that said, let's jump straight in. Regine Serena crouched in the ventilation shaft. She saw 3 of the Xenos rush down the corridor, passing just beneath her hiding spot. The entrance to the tower was 10 meters to the left. She waited. She would be as much of a witness as she could for Sifri. She heard the old woman fall and the triumphant rage of her curses. She winced when she heard the impact and reminded herself that Sifri had volunteered for the mission, knowing that this was the best ending it could have. "We have struck a blow," Serena told herself. It was possible that no one would receive the signal, but someone might, she thought. Even if no one did, the Xenos had reacted to a danger. They could be threatened. That was a thought to carry her through the days. She continued to wait and didn't dare move until the Xenos had moved on. Their senses were keen. They might hear her move. If they looked up, they might see her. Though she had taken what precautions she could, she had used a broken fan blade to shear her hair down to a stubble. All her exposed skin was covered in the grime of the ventilation system. She could not become a shadow like the enemy, but she could sink beneath the ship's centuries of detritus, which no amount of maintenance could prevent from accumulating. When she didn't move, she was just another bundle of litter, a collection of rags and sharp angles. Malnourishment was turning her body into bone covered by creased leather of flesh. Cycle by cycle, there was less and less of her to see. After a few minutes, the trio walked by again. They were in no hurry. She held her breath. This was the closest she had ever come to the enemy. The Xenos were morbidly beautiful. They were creatures of stories and hated myth. They were Eldar. Their clothing had precise elegance and lethality of straight razors. Their leader was the most beautiful and graceful of them all. Wherever she walked, terrible death followed. Serena had only seen her once from a distance. She curled her lips as the memory intruded again. Weeks of the occupation had not blunted it, nor had the avalanche of new atrocities Serena had witnessed. She had been in a shaft as now, having fled there in the first hour of the invasion. She had crawled without purpose then, scrambling away from the sounds of one-sided combat and a massacre. She had stopped by a grill that had opened onto one of the great hydroponic tanks. The tank was over 1 kilometre long and was where the crops had grown for consumption and trade. The harvest was already burning, the smoke stinging her eyes as it spread through the shaft. Not far away, invaders on hovering jet bikes herded the workers together and presented them to their leader. She was a few centimetres taller than her escorts, and there was a dark power to her presence. A terrible gravity pulled all thought and light towards her. She stalked forward to the first rank of prisoners. Her movement was ballet and serpent strike. She pulled out a blade. It was narrow, curved, wrought with dark artistry. It was more than a weapon. It was an instrument. The leader brought the blade toward the face of the nearest prisoner. She began to do things. Serena had tried to look away. She had failed, and now the memory was an unwanted companion of her days. The echoes of the Eldar's steps faded. Serena counted to 100, then started moving. As she crawled through the shafts toward the refuge, she sniffed the air. It was the habit of her entire adult life. For almost 20 years, she had spent 8 hours of every cycle in atmosphere control, about a third of the way forward to the enginarium. It had been her duty to ensure the oxygen levels remained constant, and that the carbon dioxide and other toxic gases were scrubbed from the air. Servitors and cogitors did the work well enough most of the time, but it wasn't enough. Even a minor lapse could kill thousands. The task had been a privilege. During her shifts, she had held the lives of the Absolution citizens in her hands. That existence was in the past. The Xenos had taken atmosphere control, along with all the other centres critical to the functioning of the ship. Despite their delight in the prolonged murder, they also appeared to have every intention of keeping the population of the Absolution alive for further terrible delights. The journey through the ducts to the sanctuary was a long one. She passed by many ventilation grills. Through each, she was given a glimpse of how the culture of the Absolution had been transformed. Serena resisted the idea that the Xenos even had a culture, but its power was everywhere to be seen. All of the Eldar genius was devoted to the furthering of atrocity. The aesthetics that confronted Serena strove toward the fusion of desire and pain. The Xenos had not had the time to remove the imperial iconography of the ship's interior, nor did they appear to care. In the spaces where they chose to linger, they forced the enslaved humans to desecrate the holy images and statues. Serena had long since realised that this was not the sacredness of the original artwork that displeased the invaders. Rather, it was the torment suffered by the humans who had been forced to deface it that they valued. And pain. Pain everywhere, spreading out in ripples from the bridge. The Xenos took their victims singly or in groups, and made them the tribute to their appetites. The contortions of the flesh were art in its most obscene form. Serena saw her comrades bent, twisted, broken, their ends as creative as they were prolonged. The sights were always new, the awful sounds always fresh. Even when she moved deeper into the ducts, away from the corridors, the echoes of torment followed her. Working for atmosphere control had given Serena an intimate knowledge of the ventilation system. That had been her salvation. She could still move around with relative ease. As far as she could tell, it was a small group of Xenos that had seized the Absolution. An unarmed population could do nothing against them. But the ship was too vast for the invaders to patrol. They could hold the vital points and do what they would to anyone they discovered, but that left vast gaps through which she could slip. For now. The refuge was a larger space at the centre of a tangle of shafts. The group that Serena had joined was small. There were 8 other members. They did not dare call themselves a resistance. The few attempts to mount a rebellion of any scale had ended in bloodbaths. Improvised weaponry and untrained fighters were taken apart by cool sadism. The Xenos were far from being threatened, or even angered. Instead, they were entertained. They were amused. Serena and her companions had learned from the mistakes of their fellows. They did not launch assaults. They sought to keep each other alive. They scavenged. They found new hiding places. They watched. They endured. But today, at last, they had acted. A week after the beacon, Serena was alone. In the lower reaches of the ship, in a starboard access tunnel that ran next to the hull. She was on a food run, and it was not going well. The last several had not. They were all growing weak. She paused in the shadows between the lumen strips, knelt, and prayed. She prayed for the strength to continue to struggle. She dared not ask for anything more. Her prayer was addressed to the Emperor, but was answered by monsters. Their arrival was announced by a grinding vibration that seemed to Serena to reach through the entire hull. There was a rising shriek of tortured metal on either side of her. She covered her ears. Thinking that the destruction of the Absolution was upon her, she stared at the wall, waiting for it to vanish and for the venting atmosphere to propel her to a frozen death in the void. Instead, gigantic drill heads burst through the hull. Foaming sealant closed off the gaps between the ship's hull and that of the boarding torpedo before the atmosphere had more than a second to escape. Access hatches slammed down. The monsters emerged. Now this is how Space Marines arrive. There's no fanfare, there's no song and dance. The first thing you know about it is just an almighty crash. They just board the ship, no questions asked. Serena cowered. She knew of Space Marines. She had never seen any of the Adeptus Astartes in person, though she had seen many representations in everything from lithographs to commemorative statuary. None of those images resembled the beings who confronted her. Their armour was void black, emblazoned with a coiled silver dragon. The group that stepped out from the sternward torpedo, flanking the captain, seemed to have a variety of horns added to their helmets. But then the captain removed his helmet and everything got worse. The horns were real, and those eyes, a profound, glistening black, as if the void itself had arrayed itself in flesh and ceramite to walk the Absolution. The captain approached her. He was gigantic. From her perspective, his crescent horn seemed to graze the roof of the corridor. But then something even more immense emerged from the interior of the torpedo. This thing truly did fill the corridor. A behemoth on pillar legs. It was a sarcophagus and tank. 3 horns were affixed to the upper portion of the shell. Blades had been added to its arms, blades that looked a lot like bones. The organic artifacts were somehow more frightening than the formidable armaments at the end of the arms. Serena looked up to the captain, her gut filling with ice. Another myth had come to the Absolution. More creatures from humanity's collective nightmares, and she wondered if she had helped summon them. "You've come to kill us all, haven't you?" she whispered. It's got to be intimidating enough seeing a squad of Space Marines for the first time in your life, having been spent the past week or so desperately hiding for your own survival at the hands of Dark Eldar, let alone ones as savage looking as the Black Dragons, literal bone horns adorning their armour. And then they remove their helms and you see, hang on a minute, it's not just their armour, they actually have horns and jet black eyes. I mean, it's almost as bad as the Night Haunts are turning up to save you. Is it any wonder she thinks they're here to kill her? The monster looked down at her. "We received a message from this ship," he said. His voice was huge. Though he spoke quietly, the tones rumbled in his chest. There was a hint of a snarl too. "Did you send it?" he asked. She would not hide, even now. As she thought that the signal had summoned more of the Emperor's enemies, something from an even more fearsome hell than the Eldar, she would not dissemble. Not in her final moment. "I did," she croaked. "Good. You will be useful." She blinked. She wasn't sure how to interpret that statement. The captain continued. "We saw a Xenos raiding ship affixed to this vessel's superstructure. What do you know of their numbers?" Her mind seemed to stutter as she tried to reconcile the monster's words with his appearance. He wasn't about to destroy her. "Who?" she managed. I found this quite funny. The captain's just straight down to business. "Just tell me where the Xenos are, how many there is, and we'll do the rest." And she's slowly coming to this realization that these giant monsters, even more terrifying than the Dark Eldar, who look more, more like Chaos Marines than the widely imagined Space Marine image you'd have across the Imperium, are actually here to save her. Well, the Emperor protects, milady. An expression passed over the captain's features. Serena found it hard to read the face of a being so far removed from the human, but it seemed to her that she had just witnessed pity. I am Volos, captain of the second company of the Black Dragons, and we have come to purge this ship of Xeno filth. It took another few moments before the woman understood that the Black Dragons had come to save her and her kind, not destroy them. I'm sure she would be much more reassured if we were Ultramarines, Lisgar said over the Vox channel. I love that line. I actually chuckled when I read it for the first time. It works on so many levels. The Black Dragons are probably used to this reaction, getting it on probably every world they campaign on. The prim and proper Ultramarine image, the paragon of everything a Space Marine should be, in universe and out. How could they not roll their eyes and make sarcastic quips about it? Just as, so many fans of the universe do. Volos shot him a look, but said nothing. Lisgar was probably right. We are never wanted, he thought, but we are just as necessary. He felt no resentment over the mortal's fear. The emotion was the natural reaction to all Adeptus Astartes, though the terror he and his brothers inspired was of another kind. It marked the difference between gods and monsters. It had its uses, he had always known this, but only recently had he come to accept the extremes of some of those uses. He waited, and when the woman realised he wasn't going to kill her, she stood. "What is your name?" he asked. "Regine Serena, Lord," she answered. Good. She was speaking. She had moved past the shock of the Black Dragon's arrival. "Tell me about the enemy," he ordered. Stumbling through her words, still frightened, she described the situation aboard the Absolution. When she had finished, Volos said, "Go to your companions. Tell them to stand ready." "Yes, Lord. We will follow you." Volos curled a lip as he donned his helmet once more. "You won't find us hard to find." Boom. What a line to finish on. I love the confidence of the Space Marines. You won't find us hard to find. They don't care who the enemy is. They don't care, what their name is, who it is, how many of them there are. They just want to know where they are. They're just going to go lay the smack down in the Emperor's name. It's just such a stark contrast to the mere simple human struggle we had throughout the start of the passage. Hiding from the enemy, having to abandon any form of attack because it just amused the Eldar. So they had to resort to hiding, scrounging for food just to try and survive for as long as possible. And then all of a sudden, an almighty crash as a boarding torpedo just rips through the hull and these 8-foot monsters just bowl out. Right, where's the Xenos? Point us in the right direction. Like I said, it's not an epic action-packed one, but a really enjoyable passage, and just look at the Black Dragons. It definitely makes me want to read more of the chapter, even this little glimpse of them. But what do you guys think? As always, drop your comments down below. Are you a fan of the Black Dragons chapter? Did you enjoy their pop at the Ultramarines? Can you think of a more terrifying loyalist chapter to a mere human? Flesh tearers, perhaps? Maybe when their rage is up, but they don't look as intimidating as the Black Dragons at least. Legion of the Damned? Well, I guess technically they're not a loyalist chapter, but they'd be pretty terrifying when they showed up. As always, drop your thoughts down below. A huge thank you to all my subscribers. Your support really means a lot to me. It truly does. And if you're new, please consider subscribing to help the channel continue to grow. But with that said, I am off, and I'll see you guys again real soon.